So we are going to keep going in this idea of what church is, specifically now through the books of Acts, but I think I want to do a quick overview of where we've been, because I realize for me, I'm immersed in it, and so I'm thinking about it every day, every week, but if you're, not here every time or just something didn't stick, you might not remember sort of the big theme. So here's the first big idea of answering what is church, okay? And the way I phrase it is church is a gathering of redeemed people who are reconciled to God, reconciled to each other, and who all play a role in how the project goes. And so the picture is we gather because there's this reconciliation with God. If there was no reconciliation with God, this is not happening. If there is no reconnecting with God, this is meaningless. Right? But beyond that, what God wants to do is also reconcile us with each other, meaning we all come from different places, with different backgrounds, with different ideologies, with different politics, with different personalities, but yet, because we're reconciled with God, the true humanity is meant to be reconciled with each other, and that's what the world needs to see. But the last part of this really goes back to my whole thing with image, being an image of God, right? And being an image of God comes with it this idea of dominion, this idea of rule. And so we're gathering to move forward, as people connected with God and connected with each other, but also to move God's kingdom forward. We get to play a role in whether or not and how the world experiences the kingdom now before the kingdom fully gets installed. But there were some structural elements we looked at. So if we go to the next slide. There is church structure. So how does a church look? There's membership. In other words, we have to identify who's in and who's out, who the church is responsible for and who the church is not responsible for. That if you're a member of a church, the church is responsible for your spiritual growth and you're responsible for serving within the church. We're not going to expect that of someone who's outside of the church or a newcomer that just comes. So Paul makes it really clear. There's this delineation of who's in, who gets church discipline, who gets church blessing, who gets church provision, but who's not. Like someone we love them, but it's not within the purview of church responsibility. But also there's this idea that within the church there is structure in the sense that God provides shepherds and leaders and servants. And we talked about deacons and elders, and it looks different in the Baptist church than it does in the Presbyterian church than it looks in us. But God doesn't just say, okay, go do it. Just let this be some organic startup. Okay, God gives structure. He cares enough for us to give us leaders that will shepherd us and pour into us. So some of the principles that we looked at in terms of why we meet and what church is about is this. Like, we're a temple. This is the new temple. And that's actually why there was so many clashes with the religious rulers of the day, is because the Jesus followers were saying, we are the temple of God. It's not a place, it's a people. And wherever the people of God go, that is a place where the world can now come to experience the presence of God. And that caused so much anger with the religious leaders and led to a lot of persecution. But one way to understand what we're doing is we're a temple. God's presence lives here. People can experience God here through His presence and through our lives. But with that, we can't be a temple unless the presence of God is here. So we recognize that we are Spirit-empowered, Spirit-filled people. And if you remember throughout the first few chapters of Acts, it says they were filled with the Spirit, then they went out. They were filled with the Spirit, then they spoke. And so it's this refilling. It's not a one-time deal, right? We should seek and pray to be filled and filled and filled again with the Spirit of God. But also what this tells me is if we're Spirit-empowered, we're not powerless. That we as a people sometimes feel that there are circumstances in life that we have no power over. But if the power of God is in us, how can we call ourselves powerless? Right? He trusts us with His authority and power to affect our lives, but also affect the others. And last week I spoke the idea of what we do in the context of the church body is more significant sometimes than what we do outside. That the way we love each other or the way we bring in sin into the church, God takes that very seriously, because if we're meant to be the witness to the world, how can we be the witness to the world if there's sin in the camp or evil in the camp? But on the flip side, as we love each other, as we care for one another, right, that's actually very, very significant in God's kingdom. And what we'll get into is the reason that is important is part of the role of the Spirit. Last week, Ananias and Sapphira, they said, you lied to the Spirit. Why to the Spirit? Because the role of the Spirit within the church is actually to maintain unity. So the world will look at us and say, there is a humanity I want to be part of, a humanity that's united and loved. Okay, so that's sort of an overview of where we've been the last couple of months, and now we're landing on Acts chapter 6. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 6, verse 1. Now in these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. And the 12 summoned the full number of the disciples and said, "It is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to ministry of the word." And what they said pleased the whole gathering, and they chose Stephen, a man full of the Holy Spirit, and Philip, and Prochorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Parmenas, and Nicolaus, a proselyte of Antioch. These they set before the apostles, and they prayed and laid their hands on them. And the word of God continued to increase, and the number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests became obedient to the faith. So what's the background? The background is this. There are two sort of groups of Jewish people in the early church. One was just the Jews that lived around that area, and they spoke Aramaic. Then there was another set of Jews that were the products of the diaspora, the captivity. So there is a group of Jews that were sent way out into the Roman world because they were held captive and they were oppressed, and so they spoke Greek. And now they're coming in, right? Because around this time, Pentecost, all that, people were coming in, people got saved. So now within this church, you have these Aramaic-speaking Jews who grew up within the area and within the Jewish culture at that time. And you had these Greek-speaking Jews who were just returning from exile, okay? So I don't know what that would look like. Maybe you have foreigners in a church and more locals in a church. It's kind of like that, kind of like our situation in a ways. And what the Greek-speaking Jews felt is that their widows were not getting taken care of in terms of meals being provided, whereas the Aramaic-speaking Jews, the local Jews, their widows were getting taken care of. And so they're upset, okay? So last week we talked about what threatened the early church and continues to threaten the church and derail the disunity of the church was a lie. It was a sin. Ananias and Sapphira wanted to pretend like they were holier than they were. It became about them. So the lie was what threatened the unity of the church. This week, what threatens the unity of the church and derails the calling of the church, actually in verse 1. So if we could look at verse 1 again. It said, "Now in these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, accompanied by the Hellenists, the Greek-speaking Jews, arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution." Let's leave that up there. Did they have a right to complain? Absolutely. If I went to a church and my group of people that I identified most closely with were being neglected, I have a valid point to complain. The problem is that word complaint. In the Greek and in the Hebrew, it's also better translated as grumbling. Okay, and in the Hebrew, grumbling is also translated as murmuring. So the sound of the complaint is like murmuring, like this, like under your breath, okay? So what is grumbling? Grumbling is a secret displeasure that is not openly declared. It's like muttering under your breath, complaining, "Oh, why are they always like that? Why do they do that all the time?" That's the kind of complaint that is happening in this situation. So it's not the nature of the complaint. The complaint was valid. Yes, we should take care of all the widows. It's how they went about expressing their concern and displeasure. Maybe it was in little secret groups where they would just say, "Man, why don't they take care of our widows? Our widows are starving." But the nature and the heart of it was not helpful. It was probably not healthy. It was probably a little bit more like gossip. And the Bible becomes very clear that grumbling, muttering, complaining in this way is not how we are to live. Even as far back as Exodus, when God is taking them through the desert, here's what Exodus chapter 16 says. "They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt. and the whole congregation of the people of Israel, there it is, grumbled against Moses. It doesn't say they brought Moses constructive criticism. It doesn't say they brought Moses a plan. They grumbled. They muttered under their breath. Why did Moses bring us out here? Like, what is he doing? So then here's what it says. Verse 3, and the people of Israel said to them, so now they're more open about it, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill us, this whole assembly, with hunger. So let's talk a little bit about grumbling, okay? So grumbling is the audible expression of discontentment which arises when our desires turn into unmet expectations. Let me say that again. We grumble when our desires turn into unmet expectations, or when we want things on our timing and maybe want things sooner than God intends. Makes sense, right? We expect it this way, it doesn't happen, and we get passive-aggressive about it, and we grumble. You waiting in line for too long, 20 minutes waiting in line at the DMV, which is a good kind of, I think, a good representation of hell on earth. It's probably the DMV, right? You grumble. You're driving in traffic, right? It's out of your control. What do? We grumble because it's not meeting our expectations and it's not meeting our timing. So the Bible actually links grumbling to selfishness, and it says it can be the manifestation of wanting to prioritize one's own comfort, convenience, or desires over God's will. Right? Grumbling is a manifestation of us wanting to prioritize our own comfort, our own convenience, and our own desires over God's will. Okay, so let me take you to a chapter before Exodus 16, before they grumble, and this is in Exodus 15. Here's what it says in 15:27. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. So right before they grumbled, where did God bring them? To an oasis in the desert, to a paradise in the desert. What is God trying to show them in chapter 15? I will take care of you. I will provide for you. Then things get hard, and they forget the provision, and they forget God's will, and they forget God's goodness, and they start to grumble. Grumbling and muttering and complaining is very, very short-sighted because what? We want it now. We want the problem fixed now. And if we're so focused on the problem being fixed now, sometimes we lose track of what God did and what God's trying to do. Why isn't God faster? Why doesn't God fix this? Why doesn't God bring us this? Right? So it seems like for me, when I first thought about this is such a minor little sin, God. Like, why are you spending so much time talking about grumbling? I mean, let people complain. Let people vent. But if you look at the New Testament, it comes up time and time again. James chapter 5, verse 9. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. That's serious. What is it saying, right? If you grumble, judgment's going to come, and the judge, God, is standing at the door waiting to judge you. That's serious. It's not something to be taken lightly. Philippians chapter 2, verse 14. Do all things without grumbling and disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Let me say this. Grumbling ruins our witness. It does. Look at what he says. Don't grumble. Don't dispute, because the world around you is crooked and twisted. We all know Christians who all they do is complain. I can think of some that are not here anymore, not at this church, but that I've worked with, and all they were just bitter, passive-aggressive, complaining about everything, and then I find out later they're Christian because I go to the church to speak. That may give it away. And I'm like, this guy's Christian? What kind of witness is that person going to have to say, believe in Christ who gives me peace? Can they say that? No way. Believe in a Christ who gives me joy. Can they say that? No way. Because what people see in their life is grumbling and dispute, muttering, passive-aggressive complaining. That's them. So Paul makes it clear, if we're in this crooked world, the world's crooked enough, if we want to shine a light, if we want to show the world what humanity can look like, it should be without grumbling or dispute. And there's loving ways to confront people. There's loving, direct ways to confront problems, right? It is in our human nature to grumble. Again, they have a right to complain. Their widows were not being fed, but that doesn't mean that grumbling is still not a danger to church unity. So I'm going to ask Daniel to share in a bit and share his experience of hearing what I would classify as grumbling. So let me preface this with a couple things. This is not going to be pretty, okay? But like I said last week, I'm glad that we can be open and share our open struggles. So this is not going to, we're not going to walk away feeling good, okay? But I think it's important for another brother to just express openly and honestly their experience with this in the context of church. So I'm going to ask us, and this is hard, I want us to try our best to listen, not to respond, but to understand, okay? So that's something we train at work. Listen to understand what he's saying, not to respond. The moment you hold your breath, that means you're trying to respond. Okay? You're trying to say, but. Okay? Listen to understand the heart, not to respond. And I'm going to pray and trust that as he shares about complaining and grumbling, he's not going to be grumbling about the grumbling. Okay? But just sharing openly. So can we call up Daniel and just be open?
Thank you. Thanks, Leo. I guess what I want to say is, I thought a little bit of what I might talk about, and I think it's not that serious. It's actually very encouraging, and it comes from a place of sharing, and I want to. I think it's important to note that I'm really grateful for our leaders. I'm really grateful for Leo, and these last 6-7 years working with the DB. It's really been I haven't done things the best way, but I'm really grateful for the way that they've supported me, and so later on, I think in the DB in the town hall, I'm going to share about my role at the church and all that, but just want to just say thanks. It's truly precious. The last 6 years, how I've been able to work with these guys, and I'm really grateful for it. And so I honestly didn't think too much about what I would share, just the general theme. And again, just coming from a place of I don't have an agenda. Right? I'm not trying to convince you of anything. And it's just really just my heart. And I think what I want to say is, the hardest thing about being a leader is not that people have opinions. I think everyone's opinion is 100% valid. I take days to understand someone's opinion, right? It's more so the idea of there's misunderstanding in the opinion, right? Like an example of the verse, it's not it's almost like it's assuming that the leaders didn't care about the widows, right? But what if those people took the extra step and was like, hey, we have these widows that are hungry. Is there anything we can do about it? And who knows? Maybe the leaders had some other things that they were concerned about. Maybe they didn't know. I don't know. But I think that coming to a place of understanding is really hard. And I speak from that with experience. And I think today I want to share with you guys my testimony of how I've of sort of a window into almost a year of counseling, spending a lot of money on it, and just real quick, right? 1 minute testimony. I wasn't supposed to live. My parents were supposed to abort me. Somehow in my childhood, I grew up with this idea that, hey, like I have a sister with special needs, and it's my responsibility to take care of her. But all my childhood, she misunderstood me, right? Like obviously she misunderstood me because she doesn't, she's not normal, right? And so I'm coming from a place where I really care for my sister, I really care for my family, but she doesn't take that for, she takes it for granted, right? She can't understand my love for her. And I think I never saw that, right? Like as a kid, I always mistook like her, like kind of throwing that love back to my face as like, oh man, she doesn't appreciate me, right? As an adult, fast forward to being an adult, I started a business. I was able to work with amazing people. To this day, I work with really awesome people, right? But I would say there's misunderstanding with every single person I've worked with. Like it's just the nature of how things are, right? And I'm lucky that I have people that work with me that are actually really mature and really professional, and in a way that's helped us to get a lot further than I could have ever done by myself. But I would say like the boss of the boss that really kind of like, sort of like tore me apart was, two things, right? After I got married, I really care for my wife, right? Like, people won't ever understand how much I care for Jessie, right? But I think a lot of times people misunderstand the way I care for her. Even she misunderstands the way I care for her, right? And so I think as much as I care for her, there's always misunderstanding. It's like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Right? And then the other thing is just the other aspect of my job that I don't talk about a lot. The most energy I spend with my work, 3 or 4 hours a day, is if I had to put a name to the game, it's just being misunderstood and enduring pain. And it's what Jensen Huang says. The more you can endure pain, the further you'll go. And this is aside from like the business I started. This is the investing side that I do. It's painful, right? It's and when you combine all these things, right? When you go to work and there's misunderstanding, when you go home there's misunderstanding. When at church, like at church you know, right? You kind of know what people are kind of sort of talking about, and it's misunderstanding too, right? Like I know, right? I know it's just coming from a place of misunderstanding, and I think when you combine all these things with my childhood, it creates an atomic like bomb, right? So much to the point where if I had to be like really transparent, like there's a period in my life, 2 or 3 times where I actually got on my ledge, right? I'm not trying to like, it's not shock value, right? This is me being transparent because I wanted the pain to the end. It was just so painful. But I think hopefully this part is where it sort of gets a little more encouraging, okay? It's the part where, I realized like God allows us to go through pain for a purpose. And for me, it's like, like now that, I've been through all this, at some point, like God just told me, hey, Daniel, like now that you understand how much you've been misunderstood, now you understand my love for you, right? Like you take that for granted every day, right? Like you don't understand how crazy I am for you. But I died for you, and I was misunderstood. This is God talking to me. And now that you actually understand a little bit my love for you, like I want you to like go and just like serve people unconditionally. And so, like this year, I think this is the last thing I want to share. It's just like this year we have the privilege of working with like 12 organizations. So the way we work with them is we don't just go there try and feel good. I tell them, hey, 3 things. I'm like, no BS. What do you guys need? And I would say every organization that I've worked with, all they need is resources. Yeah, they'll take help, sure. Like if volunteers want to come help, sure. But what they need is resources. And we can do we as in like not just our organization, but like we as a church can do so much more than you can even imagine if you love each other, if you take the extra time to understand each other. And it's crazy to see how far we can go. Like it's not because of me, right? It's just like I see this as a blessing because God allowed me to go through so much pain for this purpose. And like the next step we're gonna do is we're gonna build a retirement center. Like that's how far we're gonna, like 3 to 5 years. Like I never talk about things that I can't do. But 3 to 5 years, we're gonna build a retirement center. And these are all things that I never would imagine, but it's because I understand like there is a need out there, and we can go a lot further if we simply just understand each other. And so Yeah. Thanks so much, Leo, for just trusting me with the the time that I can share, and I really appreciate Leo as well. Just I think he takes a lot of time and effort to understand like where I'm coming from. So
He had to say he still works with amazing people because some of them are here. But yeah, I mean, that was, there's a lot more that he maybe will share in the future, but that's, I think, just a picture of someone who, a lot of the way we feel misunderstood is through just people grumbling about us, people not understanding the heart behind things. So I hope we kind of see, it's quite dangerous, I think, the way that sometimes people approach concerns and frustrations, and there's a loving way to do it, and there's also a way that breaks people down. Okay, fortunately, God used it for the good, but it's not always healthy. Okay, but I want to look at the response. Actually, this is the main part. What was the church response to hearing this grumbling, this complaining, this passive-aggressive muttering? What did they do? They picked 7 men to take care of the situation. And if you look at all of those names, they're Greek. Smart, right? Who was having the problem? The Greek Christians were having a problem about their Greek widows being not taken care of. So the apostles, the church leaders, they appointed 7 men to take care of the situation. So I'll say it this way. What threatened the church was actually complaining, but the response of the church was commissioning. Think about that, right? What threatened the church was this complaining, but the response of the church was not to fight back, not to complain back, not to scold. The response of the church was commissioning. In other words, empowering people to do the stuff. Or I'll say it this way. Unmet needs and grumbling create the potential for disunity, but unmet needs also create the potential to launch ministries. There was a need. The need was these widows need ministry. And it led to complaints. And that complaint could have created disunity. But unmet needs are opportunities and potential to also launch a ministry. So what did they do? They empowered these people, and two specifically that I want to just briefly talk about, Stephen and Philip, and they laid their hands on them and they prayed for them, and that's a very Jewish way of giving blessing and a Jewish way of confirming a calling. But what I want us to see is they prayerfully found people to fill the needs and to launch the ministry. They prayerfully found those people. It wasn't based on who was qualified. It wasn't based on who could cook the best food. It wasn't based on who had the best, relationships with the widows. It wasn't based on qualification or talent alone, but based on prayer. We could have the best musician at this church. Do we put him up there? Not necessarily. Because it's not based on qualification. It's not based on being good at something or having a passion for something. The role of the leadership is actually to prayerfully consider, is this a person God wants to use in this situation? We don't just jump in because, hey, you're talented, or hey, you want to do this. We prayerfully consider before commissioning to ministry. And if you trace the path of Stephen and Philip after this moment, it's pretty crazy where they ended up. Just to give us a sneak peek at Philip's life, in verse 8, or chapter 8, here's what it says. So a few chapters later, now those who were scattered about went about preaching the word. Philip went down to the city of Samaria, not an easy place to be, okay, and proclaimed to them the Christ. Look what happens. And the crowds with one accord paid attention to what was being said by Philip, and when they heard him and they saw the signs that he did, for unclean spirits, crying out with a loud voice, came out of many who had them, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed, so that there was much joy in the city. He started as just serving the widows. A few chapters later, he's preaching the word. Entire city gets, not entire city, but the church in Samaria gets started. He's performing miracles. And later, what we'll see next chapter, Stephen becomes a great teacher of the word. He does this awesome job in the next chapter of explaining how the entire Old Testament actually ties in to how the Jews were reacting to Jesus. They started by just serving the widows, and God launched them into these ministries that greatly affected the world. N.T. Wright said it this way. He said, once you lay hands on people and pray for them, you have no idea what the Spirit's going to do. So to the church leaders, they laid hands and they prayed and they said, we're just going to commission you to do this tiny little thing. You're just going to serve tables. But when you do that, watch and see. Sometimes God takes them way beyond that. Sometimes God calls them to just stay faithful to where they're at. But when you lay hands on people, when you ask God to use them, you have no idea where they're going to end up. I had many friends growing up that experienced this. I had a couple of friends that went to this church, a huge church, and they were in high school, and they wanted to lead music. But the teachers at that church, I think to some extent very wisely, would not allow high school students to lead high school service worship music sets. Okay, maybe they felt they were immature, or I don't think they were necessarily holding them back, but a couple of my friends felt really frustrated that they had this gift and this desire, and they weren't being commissioned, or at least given the opportunity to lead, because the adult teachers, counselors wanted to lead. So they actually came to my church and started leading at my church. And they developed this gifting. They honed the talent, but there was a spirit-filled gifting. And in 2000, the year 2000, one of those friends played at what was called the Call DC, which was this gathering of 400,000 Christians at the mall in Washington, D.C. to pray for the nation. So he went from this tiny little Southern Californian town, a church that wouldn't let him kind of exercise his gift. Again, maybe rightfully so. But he came to a church that commissioned and laid hands and trusted him and launched him to this ministry. A few years later, 3 years later, he's playing in front of 400,000 Christians, leading them in worship to God. That's crazy. I used to, believe it or not, be a teacher at Vacation Bible School, VBS, which I know is weird because I don't like kids, but I felt called to do it just to serve. And my assistant at the time was this other person, maybe 4 or 5 years younger than me. And I was like, okay, why don't you do the lesson this time? Partly because I don't like kids, but partly because I wanted to empower him. I said, why don't you do the lesson? And he gave this lesson on the crucifixion that like made me want to cry. Like the kid, you talked about all the physicality of the nails in the wrists, and all the kids in that room were like, they wanted to cry. They were so shocked. And I was like, this person has a gift. This person has a gift, right? And so over time, he got these opportunities and was commissioned and eventually ended up being a pastor. So you just never know. But I want us to understand that where Stephen and Philip and my friends started was not at the top. It was actually in humble servanthood. So always, 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 we see this in the Bible. The path to doing great things for God starts in humble servanthood, in being faithful in the little things. Deacon literally means he who waits tables. That's what Philip and Stephen were, servants, the people waiting tables. We don't hold those people in high regard. Those are the people that before you go to Ding Tai Fung, they set your table so you're ready. You don't even see them. Do you even care about? We probably don't even care. We don't think like, oh, who set my table? Nobody cares. And then you leave, and they're the same people that clean up. That's where Stephen and Philip and these other 7 men started, setting tables, cleaning up, serving food. It's so menial. But that's what the church needs. Deacons are people who serve so others could eat. That's the type of servant the church wants to commission. That I'm going to run the slides in the back so that others could worship. I'm going to run kids ministry. I'm going to serve in kids ministry so others, the kids, could learn about Jesus. I'm going to organize meals after church so others could fellowship. That's a deacon. That I do things so others can experience Christ. That I'm going to arrange men's outing and women's lunch so others could come together and connect. I'm going to make communion bread, not for me, but so others could have communion. That's the commissioning the church needs to do. I'm going to donate my time and my money so others would have the resources they need to do their ministry. Or it could be even, I'm going to show up and pray for someone today so others could be blessed. That's the commissioning that we're talking about. That's what a healthy church and the church in Acts look like, that there is serving instead of grumbling, commissioning instead of complaining. So remember, the whole time I'm looking at Acts, I'm always asking this question: what is church? So today I just want us to understand that, yeah, there's going to be complaints, and yeah, we're not going to make perfect decisions and interact with each other in perfect ways. Yeah, we're not always going to feel good when people bring up concerns. But what is church? It's actually a body that commissions its members into ministry within the church and ministry to go out. That's what needs to be happening. And I think that's what is happening, right? That we prayerfully see there's a need, and we're going to commission, empower somebody, or someone will step up. And yes, we acknowledge you. We support you. Do that. You have our backing as a body, not just as leadership, as a church. We trust the God in you, the gifts that he's given you, the ideas he's putting in you, the passion he's giving you to do ministry here and out there. That's a principle I hope we would continue to follow as a church. So let me pray.